Hello everybody, this is David. Welcome back to my channel. This video is a continuation of our series, The Christian Ethic in the 21st Century, and we've started looking at how the Judeo-Christian ethic works itself out in our lives in this century. And we've just finished looking at the world of work. What I want to do in this video is look at the world of money and wealth, and how does the Christian sort that out in their own minds and in their own lives. It is true to say that we are living in a time where we've essentially never had it so good. There is so much money around. Everyone essentially has their own house, their own car, all kinds of material possessions. And in a sense, we have to work out how we can essentially sanctify our wealth, how we can make it work for the kingdom of God, and how we can have a correct view and outlook on money and wealth. Now, of course, I'm generalizing there. It's not true for every Christian in the world. Some Christians still live in abject poverty. Some live in terrible conditions, essentially bonded labour in certain countries. But the precepts and the ideas and the principles of managing wealth are the same for all of us. So what I wanted to do is let's go to the Bible and see what it teaches about wealth and possessions. Now in this video we'll be looking at 10 aspects, that the 10 things that the Old Testament teaches. Now the Old Testament is the foundation of our Judeo-Christian outlook, our Judeo-Christian ethic in the 21st century. The Old Testament is the foundational document of Christianity. It was the scriptures, the Jewish scriptures that Jesus Christ himself knew and taught, and it has a lot to say. So let's have a look then. Let's see what it does say. So firstly, it has been said that prosperity is the blessing of the Old Testament and the adversity of the New Testament. Let's see if that's true. The Old Testament expects to find the good man flourishing and prosperous, and the New Testament expects to find him afflicted and in trouble. Now I'm going to use the word man to denote everybody, men and women, humanity, people in other words. So it is true that in the Old Testament there is a strong line of thought that does connect prosperity with goodness and adversity with wickedness, just as Job's comforters did. Now it is very significant actually that after all his afflictions, Job does finish up with renewed and increased prosperity, as we read in the book of Job chapter 42 verses 10 to 17. I have been young and now am old, said the psalmist, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken or his children begging for bread, as we read in the book of Psalm chapter 37 verse 25. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honour and life, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 30 verses 8 and 9. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 10 verse 22. Wealth and riches are in the house of the man who fears the Lord, as we read in the book of Psalms 112 verse 3. Wisdom has long life in her right hand, and honour and riches in her left. Riches and honour are with her, lasting wealth and prosperity, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 3 verse 16 and chapter 8 verse 18. So the Old Testament does connect goodness and prosperity. Secondly, in the Old Testament, there is a line of thought which sees the way to happiness as having neither too much nor too little. The wise man prays to God, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, lest I be full and deny you, and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God," as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 and 9. So this thinking would be very much in line with the Greek doctrine of the happy medium, which we've looked at previously. Thirdly, the Old Testament is sure that prosperity is a gift from God, and that no man should forget that it is so. The preacher talks of the man to whom God has given wealth and possessions and the power to enjoy them. This, he says, is the gift of God, as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 19. And if wealth is the gift of God, a man must use it in stewardship for God. Now, fourthly, wealth does not fall into a man's lap with no effort from him. A slack hand causes poverty, says the wise man, but the hand of the diligent makes rich, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 10 verse 4. As the Greek writer Hesiod said, "The gods have placed sweat as the price of all good things." Fifthly, there is a kind of security that wealth can bring. A rich man's wealth is his strong city and like a high wall protecting him, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 18 verse 11 and chapter 10 verse 15. There are things from which wealth can protect a man. Now there is an old Scots saying which says, "Sorrow is not so sore when there is a loaf of bread." And that was a terrible Scottish accent, I'm sorry. To be left alone is always a sore thing, but to be left alone and in destitution is still worse. So sixthly, but even if there is a kind of security in wealth, there is also an essential inadequacy in it too. The righteous man will flourish, but the man who trusts in riches will wither, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 11 verse 38. So wealth is no substitute for character and goodness. It is durable riches that wisdom gives, as we read in Proverbs chapter 8 verse 18. So when it comes to a matter of meeting the judgment of God, riches do not profit. It is righteousness which delivers a man from death, as we read in Proverbs chapter 11 verse 4. So even if riches do increase, a man is not to set his heart upon them, as we read in Psalm 62 verse 10. There is no permanence about them, for riches do not last forever, as we read in Proverbs chapter 27 verse 24. So wealth may be a gift from God, but wealth is not everything. So seventhly, at best, wealth is a secondary good. A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favour is better than silver or gold, as we read in Proverbs chapter 22 verse 1. Better a little that the righteous has than the abundance of many wicked, as we read in Psalm chapter 37 verse 16. The sleep of the labouring man is sounder than the sleep of the rich, as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes 5 verse 12. So it's only a short-sighted man who concentrates everything on the search for wealth, as we read in Proverbs chapter 28 verse 22. For when a man dies, he will carry nothing away, as we read in Psalm 49 verse 16. He will come naked into the world, and naked he will leave it, as we read in the book of Job, chapter 1, verse 21. As a man came from his mother's womb, so he will go back again. He takes nothing of his toil that he can carry away in his hand. He has toiled for the wind, as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 5, verses 15 and 16. A man should be wise enough to cease the struggle for wealth. When your eyes light upon it, it is gone, for suddenly it takes to itself wings, flying like an eagle towards heaven, as we read in the book of Proverbs chapter 23, verses 4 and 5. So he will be a foolish man to give his life to that which he cannot take with him, and to that which he can lose at any moment. Eighthly, there are occasions when wealth can hinder rather than help. A man can keep riches to his hurt, as we read in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 13. There is no profit for the man who gets riches in the wrong way. In the midst of his days they will leave him, and at his end he will be a fool, as we read in the book of Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 11. Now, wealth can make a man careless of God and of his fellow men. How can God know, he will ask? The wicked take their careless case, but the day of reckoning comes, as we read in Psalm chapter 73, verse 12. Someday the righteous will laugh at the man who would not make God his refuge and sought refuge in his wealth, as we read in Psalm chapter 52, verse 7. And ninthly, undoubtedly, wealth gives a man power over his fellow men. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender, as we read in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. Wealth gives a man a certain popularity. The poor is disliked even by his neighbours, but the rich has many friends, as we read in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 20. Now, wealth can bring with it pride and arrogance, and these are the sins which go before a fall. The poor may have to use entreaties, but the rich answers roughly, as we read in Proverbs chapter 28, verse 11. The wise man never glories in his riches any more than the wise man in his wisdom, or the mighty man in his might, as we read in Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 23. The rich man tends to be a man who is full of violence, as we read in Micah chapter 6, verse 12. Wealth can do things to a man which make him a far worse man, and to possess it is not a sin, that is wealth, but it's a danger to character. Now, tenthly, on at least one occasion in the Old Testament, the rich man is synonymous with the wicked man. It is said of the suffering servant that they made his grave with the wicked and with a rich man in his death, as we read in Isaiah chapter 53, verse 9. The writers of the Old Testament know that wealth is a gift from God, but they also know that it can separate a man from God and from his fellow men. They know that wealth is a good thing for a man to enjoy, but a bad thing for a man to put his trust in or give his life to. So it's not all about making money or gaining it or just amassing money and things and possessions. So we'll look a little bit further at this in the next video, when we look at what the Old Testament has to say about the poor. So I want to thank you for joining me in this video. See you on the next one. Bye bye.